A massive, uncontrollable fire is swallowing the Carlsbad Army airfield. May 15th, 1943. The middle of the New Mexico desert. The heat is intense. The hangars are collapsing. Even the general's personal car has been reduced to a pile of twisted, melting scrap metal. But, strangely, as the firefighters scramble in the chaos, the radar screens are empty. There are no enemy planes in the sky, no Japanese bombers, no German saboteurs. The culprit responsible for this destruction weighs only a few ounces. Welcome to Project X-Ray. This is the true story of the most absurd, yet terrifyingly effective biological weapon experiment of World War II. The story begins in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. After that day of infamy, America fell into a frenzy of dark revenge. Thousands of letters flooded the White House with ideas on how to strike back. Some suggested poison gas, others suggested bombing volcanoes to cause eruptions. But among this pile of junk mail, one letter caught the attention of Eleanor Roosevelt. The writer wasn't a military strategist. He wasn't a nuclear physicist. He was Lytle Adams, a dentist from Pennsylvania. Adams had just returned from a vacation at the famous Carlsbad Caverns. There, he stood in awe as he watched millions of Mexican free-tailed bats erupt from the caves, darkening the sunset sky like a living cloud. He made a simple, cold-blooded, logical deduction. Japanese cities are mostly made of wood and paper, bamboo screens, rice paper walls. They are tinderboxes, waiting for a spark. He thought, if we could train these spirits of the night to carry miniature incendiary bombs and hide inside the eaves of Japanese homes before dawn, the devastation would be unstoppable. Millions of fires, starting simultaneously, from the inside out. It sounded like a joke, a madman's fantasy. But President Roosevelt didn't laugh. He saw a nightmare that could win the war. He authorized it. And so, a top-secret unit, led by a dentist and supported by the U.S. Marines, was born. Codename Project X-Ray. But having a crazy idea is one thing. Making it work is another. The first challenge was the weapon itself. The military turned to Louis Fieser, the father of napalm. He designed a tiny canister filled with thickened kerosene. It weighed only 17 grams, but it burned with the fury of a blowtorch for 6 minutes straight. Next, the delivery. You can't just throw bats out of a plane at 5,000 feet. They would panic. They would freeze. The solution? Forced hibernation. The plan was chillingly simple. Cool the bats down into a coma. Stack them like ice cubes into a bomb casing. Drop them over Japan. In midair, the casing pops open. The bats warm up. They wake up. And thousands of living kamikazes disperse into the attics of the enemy city. 30 minutes later, the timers on their chests click to 0. It was a perfect plan. Until biology intervened. During a live fire test at Carlsbad Army Airfield in 1943, a group of armed bats woke up early. They didn't wait for the drop. They escaped. Instinctively, they flew into the testing base's own buildings. They hid under the fuel tanks. They crawled into the barracks. They roosted under the general's personal car. Then, the timers went off. The entire airfield was incinerated. It was a complete disaster for the safety officers. But for the Pentagon, it was a proof of concept. The base was ash, but the data was perfect. By 1944, the Marines were ready. Millions of bats, thousands of carriers. A target date was set for Osaka Bay. But then came the order to stop. Project X-Ray was suddenly canceled, not because it failed, but because a bigger shadow was looming. The Manhattan Project. The United States had a new weapon, one that didn't require biology, one that could wipe out a city in a single, blinding flash. The atomic bomb was chosen for its psychological shock. The bat bomb was buried in the classified files. Today, Project X-Ray remains one of history's darkest ironies. A weapon that worked too well, only to be replaced by something far worse. Most history books will tell you that Project X-Ray was canceled because it was clumsy, because the bats were uncontrollable, because they burned down an American airfield. But that is not the whole truth. In reality, after the disaster at Carlsbad, the Marines didn't give up. They doubled down. They moved the experiment to the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. There, in the middle of the desert, the Army engineers built something surreal. They constructed a perfect, full-scale replica of a Japanese industrial village. They imported authentic tatami mats. They built traditional wooden walls. They even studied the exact moisture content of bamboo found in Tokyo to make sure the physics were accurate. It was a ghost town, built solely to be murdered. And when they unleashed the bats upon this fake city, the results were terrifying. The official report, classified for decades, stated that the bats were arguably more effective than the standard firebombing runs. A normal plane carrying standard incendiary bombs could scatter fire over a specific line. But the bats? They acted like a living virus. They sought out the darkest, most flammable corners of the structures, the eaves, the attics, the crawl spaces. The fires didn't start on the roof. They started from the inside. They were impossible to extinguish. The umpire of the war games admitted, "A reasonable number of destructive fires can be started in spite of the extremely small size of the units. The main advantage is their placement within the enemy structures." End quote. By 1944, Dr. Adams wasn't just a dentist with a crazy idea anymore. He was the head of a weapon program that was ready for deployment. The logistical plan was drawn up. A fleet of bombers, carrying millions of bats, was scheduled to strike Osaka Bay in 1945. So, why didn't they fly? It wasn't biology. It was politics. And it was money. At the same time, in the secret laboratories of Los Alamos, another group of scientists was racing against the clock. The Manhattan Project. The atomic bomb was the most expensive gamble in human history. $2 billion. The best minds of a generation. The ego of the entire U.S. military-industrial complex was tied to the success of the gadget. Compare that to Project X-ray. A dentist. Some caves. And $2 million worth of bat food. There was a silent war being fought in the Pentagon corridors. On one side, a biological swarm that required nature to cooperate. On the other, a physics-based apocalypse that promised total, godlike control. The generals had a choice. They could burn Japan slowly, chaotically, city by city, using the chaotic forces of nature. Or, they could erase a city in a single, blinding millisecond, using the power of the sun. Admiral Ernest King, the chief of naval operations, looked at the timeline. The bats would be ready by mid-1945. The atomic bomb would be ready roughly the same time. He didn't need two apocalypse scenarios. He only needed one. And in the eyes of the military elite, the bat bomb lacked one crucial element: psychological terror. Burning houses was tactical. Vaporizing a city was strategic. They didn't just want to destroy the enemy's buildings. They wanted to break the enemy's soul. And so, the order came down from the top. Not because the bats failed, but because they were too slow, too cheap, and frankly, not terrifying enough, compared to the splitting of the atom. So, what happened to the man who started it all? Dr. Lytle Adams did not get a medal. He did not become a hero. When the war ended, the bat bomb was buried under mountains of red tape, classified as a strange failure. Adams returned to his dental practice in Pennsylvania. He went back to drilling teeth and filling cavities. But he never let go of his idea. Until his death, he maintained that Project X-ray was not a mistake. In fact, he argued it was a humanitarian mercy. Think about it. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki didn't just burn buildings. They vaporized people. They left behind a radioactive shadow that poisoned the blood of generations. They created a horror that the world is still afraid of today. Adams argued that his bats would have been different. They would have set fires. Yes, they would have destroyed the industrial war machine. Yes, but they would have allowed people to run. Fires move slowly. Nuclear shockwaves do not. He believed that his army of bats could have ended the war without the cancer, without the radiation sickness, and without the moral stain of atomic weapons. It is a strange calculation to make. Which is worse? $1 billion of uranium meant to erase a city in a flash? Or 1 million bats meant to burn it down piece by piece? The military chose the flash. They chose the shock. They chose the weapon that made them feel like gods, rather than the one that relied on the chaotic instincts of a flying rodent. It is one of history's great ironies. We look back at the bat bomb and laugh. We call it crazy. We call it absurd. But in a war that killed 80 million people, was it really crazier than the alternative? Today, the only physical evidence of this project sits in dusty museum display cases. Empty metal canisters. Silent. Cold. A reminder of the time the U.S. military tried to weaponize nature itself. The bats still fly out of the Carlsbad caverns every evening at sunset. They are free, they are wild, and they are no longer soldiers. But somewhere, in the archives of history, the question remains. This has been the story of Project X-Ray, the weapon that worked too well to ever be used.